Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Zarna Joshi. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself soon enough. Ah, here she is. Welcome. That's Kathy over there. Kathy is the one who's been managing this tour, and this is the first event of this tour. So we're kicking it off here in New Orleans, and so thank you all so much for being here. From here, we're going to be heading east, several events in Florida, several events in Virginia, event in North Carolina, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot going on. And
Could you repeat your name? I want to write down.
Zarna. Yeah, don't worry, you're gonna see a bunch of stuff. So, could you go ahead, and it's the downward arrow. Okay, cool. Before we go into it, I want to give you all a trigger warning. The reason why I'm doing that is because when we're talking about climate change and when we're talking about the root causes of climate change, we have to talk about oppression. And so that brings up a lot of sensitive issues that are difficult to talk about and difficult to hear. And so that's why I want to let you know we will go into deep historical trauma from all around the world in multiple scenarios. We will use the word rape. We will talk about assault, war, violence, death, slavery, genocide, imprisonment, forced conversions, abduction, among other things. You may feel uncomfortable and defensive. If you do, it's okay. It's not wrong. It's a natural reaction to hearing things that you don't want to hear about, right? So don't worry if that comes up. Just experience it, understand it's natural, and afterwards, take time to talk to your friends about it and process it in a healthy way. Mm-hmm.
Not because of some trauma that some
Okay.
I'm actually been arrested
Okay.
69 times as a freedom fighter.
Well, thank you so much for that work, and it's okay if you leave in 15 minutes. No one will think anything of you. So, thank you so much. Go ahead. Oh, other way. Okay. So I wanted to remind everyone that we are on stolen native land, right? Land that was protected and safeguarded by the first peoples of this land for thousands of years before the colonizers showed up. So my collective and myself, Women of Color Speak Out, we are in solidarity with that struggle and with the struggle for decolonization and justice for the first peoples, their struggle. The original inhabitants of the land that New Orleans sits on were the Chitimacha, with the Atacapa, Caddo, Choctaw, Houma, Natchez, Tunica inhabiting other areas throughout what is now Louisiana. And I got that information from the American Library Association. It may be that there are First Nations and tribes who are not federally recognized, who are not in this list. And it may also be that those First Nations actually call themselves by other names that the federal government does not recognize. So in understanding decolonization, we have to actually understand that First Peoples, Indigenous peoples, have a right to determine their own name and to determine their own territory. And so this is information that still comes from colonizers. Okay, next slide. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so full disclosure, that's me. Just want to let you know I'm an unabashed, unashamed, Mother Earth loving, tree hugging, lover of nature. So go ahead. My name is Zarna Joshi. So you can see that right there. I come from Indian roots. I was born in London, so I'm British. I have a Hindu background. I have caste privilege because I come from the Brahmin caste. I'm cisgender, I'm straight, I'm college educated, thank you. I'm college educated, I'm able-bodied, I'm light-skinned. The reason why I've told you all of those things is because it's necessary to acknowledge our privileges as well as acknowledge the ways in which we're marginalized. So I'm a woman of color living in the United States. That is true, and as such, I am marginalized in those different ways. But I also have various privileges. For example, the fact that I was born in England, in the global north. by one of the biggest colonizers in the world, the British, etc., etc. Being cis, being straight, these are all things that are privileges. And if we don't acknowledge these things, it means that we're not self-aware enough to do justice work. So when we're talking about justice, when we're talking about climate justice, we also have to understand who we really are. I'm a co-founder of Women of Color Speak Out. That is my, one of my collectives. And a second collective is For the People, and I'm also a co-founder of that, which is a non-profit that's based in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm also with them. I'm a smasher of the patriarchy, I'm a decolonizer, I'm a vegan, and I'm a direct action activist. Next one. Okay, so what is the root cause of climate change, right? That's what we're going to be talking about. And in doing so, as I said before, that means we're going to be talking about oppression, and specifically we're going to be talking about the systems of oppression. And what are the systems of oppression? So you can put your hand up for now, Han, because I'm going to be going into some things. So the systems of oppression that I'm going to be talking about, and in climate justice we say are the root causes of climate change, are capitalism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. Now, we may have heard these terms, we may have even learned definitions of these terms, but I'm going to give you some definitions that we talk about in the climate justice movement, and not only in the climate justice movement, but that my own people taught me. I come from an ancient indigenous culture of India, and my own elders taught me about these systems of oppression when I was a child. So when I began to be part of the social justice movement and the climate justice movement, all of this made a lot of sense to me. It was very natural because I had already been taught it when I was a very small child. So the first system of oppression I'm going to teach you is colonialism. Colonialism is a system of power where a dominant power takes control of land and people. Now listen to what I just said, a dominant power. I did not say a government, I did not say an army. I said a dominant power. That could mean a corporation. That could mean a militia. That could mean a religion. That could mean any and all different types of things. It could mean a particular ethnicity. It could mean a particular race. It could mean a particular gender. A dominant power takes control of the land and the people. And in taking control of that land and those people, they exploit the resources of that land. So they exploit the fossil fuels. They exploit the water. They exploit the forests. They exploit the animals. They exploit the medicines. They exploit the land itself. And they exploit the people in various ways, whether by exploiting their bodies, whether by forcing them to labor, and in many different ways. Colonization means that the dominant power also builds settlements on that land. So for example, when England was colonized by the church built churches on all of the indigenous pagan sacred sites. So if you go to England today, the oldest churches that exist were built on indigenous English land, indigenous sacred pagan land. And in doing so, they didn't realize that they were unwittingly preserving the sacred lands. It was their way of putting their stamp on it, and now when you go there and all you see is churches, but if you just walk a little bit in a straight line, you'll see a sacred stone circle. You'll see a sacred grove. You'll come to another church in a straight line. And you see this all over Europe, in fact. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, colonization is inherently genocidal. It is inherently violent. Because to take control of land and people means to do things that that land and those people don't want you to do. Which means you're going to have to hurt people. Which means you're going to have to wipe out the dominant culture of that land. And therefore, colonization is not just the physical colonization of the land, it's the cultural colonization of the land. There's a reason why we're all speaking English here today. Right? We're all speaking English. We're not speaking the indigenous language of the first peoples of this land. We don't even know what that is. We've never even heard it, right? Or maybe some of us have. I don't know of anyone who's heard of the indigenous language of New Orleans, but it may be that there are people who do know it and still speak it. But language, diet, agriculture, or methods of agriculture, because it's not necessarily true that all of the first peoples didn't have agriculture. In fact, on the East Coast and in other parts, there was a lot of agriculture. It was just different methods. When the colonizers came, they brought their own methods, and those methods disrupted the natural cycles of harmony that the indigenous people had lived with for thousands of years. So language, diet, agriculture, religion, economy, the system of economy, the story of the history. They'll stamp out the known history of the land and they'll put their own version of history on there. And that's what they'll teach in the schools, in the textbooks. All of the children will learn that there were pilgrims and the first people were really happy with them. And they all got together and had a great turkey meal. Also family structures. Family structures, right? Our structures of families today are very different to what the structures of families were when indigenous people were in control. So the next system of power I'm going to tell you about is capitalism. Capitalism is a system of economy that privatizes wealth, right? That's pretty textbook, right? System of economy that privatizes wealth. That means individuals own things, not the government, right? Individuals own things, not the commons, not the people, individuals. So if an individual over here wants to take a beach in Hawaii and buy up all that land and enclose it and put a hotel on it, and then only have the people who pay to stay in that hotel have access to that beach, he can do that under a system of capitalism. And it doesn't matter what the indigenous people have to say about it. It doesn't matter if that's their sacred land. It doesn't matter if the scientists want to take over their sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, and put a telescope on it, because the colonizer says it's okay, and under capitalism, they're perfectly allowed to. So these are things that happen within a system of capitalism. In a system of capitalism, things that are used to make and transport products, such as land, oil, factories, ships, etc., are owned by individual people and the companies rather than the government. So even the things that we use to transport things, even the transit, even the railway lines, most of the railway lines in this country are owned by Warren Buffett. The people don't own them. And if the people don't own them, that means that it's much harder for the people to institute a nationwide mass transit system. Yeah. It's much harder for the people to actually put in systems that would be for the people instead of for individuals. Within a capitalist system, there are two classes. There's a capitalist class that owns everything, and then there's a worker class that does the labor that makes the profit that the capitalist class owns. So by definition, the capitalist class is small, and the working class is huge. Now, because of colonization, we get to rewrite history, and we get to rewrite what's really happening. So we get to say, oh, no, but there's another class called the middle class. The middle class is just another type of worker. They don't own those companies. They don't own the infrastructure. They don't own that factory. They don't own the actual things that transport all of these goods. They sell their labor, and they are exploited, and they are paid as little as the capitalist class can get away with. The system of capitalism makes profit by taking and destroying in order to grow the economy. Under capitalism, we must have continuous growth, always growing. Relentless consumption, it's never enough. And we measure this by the GDP, the gross domestic product. If we put in a pipeline, the GDP goes up. If we cut down a forest, the GDP goes up. If we put in a private prison, the GDP goes up. It doesn't matter whether it's right or it's wrong. The GDP will go up, and the capitalist class will make money. So the next system of power I want to tell you about is patriarchy. Now, this is a definition you will not have heard, probably most places. You will not find in any textbooks because this comes directly from my elders. Patriarchy is a system of power that convinces you you are only a body. It convinces you you are only a body. And that comes from the ego. Because your ego tells you you exist, and you exist in this body. But patriarchy takes it a step further and says, no, you are this body. And you are only this body. And if you're only this body, then your number one priority is to get things for this body. And if that's your number one priority, you're going to use whatever privileges you can gather to justify getting things for your body. So, if you're a man, you're going to use that as a justification to dominate people who are not men, or who do not identify as cis men. If you're straight, you're going to use that as a way to justify dominating and controlling people who are not straight. If you're white, you're going to use that to dominate and control people who are not white or who do not identify as white, and take what you want from them. If you're a colonizer, you're going to use that as your justification to control and dominate the indigenous people of the land and take what you want from them. And here's a key point. If you're a human, you're going to use that as your excuse to control and dominate anyone who's not human. And you're going to say it's your right because humans control this planet. Most people don't know that definition of patriarchy. They think it's about hating men. It's not about hating men. Men also are harmed under this system of patriarchy. Because you might be a man, but what if you're not a white man? What if you're not an able-bodied man? What if you're not a rich man? What if you're not a colonizer man? What if you're not a human man? What if you're not a cis man? What if you're a trans man? There are all of these ways in which men are also harmed. And what most people don't realize is the rich, white, cis, able-bodied men at the top of every food chain are the most isolated, depressed people on the planet. They are not happy at all. That's why they're constantly trying to fill this hole with things. No one suffers more from patriarchy than every single one of us. That's the truth. And the system of patriarchy thrives on fear and intimidation. People have to be afraid. Otherwise, they'll speak out against this. So women have been taught forever to never speak up about sexual assault. Cis men have been taught forever to go with what other men want. Otherwise, they won't be included in the boys' club anymore. White men have been told, just be quiet. Just be quiet, because you've got privilege too. If you speak up, you'll have to give up your privilege. And on and on and on. This is what patriarchy is. So, if you'll notice, racism was in every one of those systems of oppression. So racism is that system of power where the dominant power, and in this particular instance for the last 500 years of history, it has been white people who really essentially invented racism. They invented racism as a way to justify controlling and dominating the indigenous people, the people they enslaved and forced to do the labor, whether they were black, whether they were indigenous. In many times it was mixed. In many times they were all indigenous because the black people were stolen from their indigenous lands and forced here and forced to come and labor here. So meanwhile, we're also seeing that we have indigenous people coming across the border, fleeing violence and terror and war and climate change, right? But they're being told, no, you're other. You're different. So we're seeing racism everywhere. So what I'm actually going to do is we're going to do a workshop where I'm actually going to give you some scenarios. Now that I've given you those definitions, I'm going to give you some scenarios. And then in those scenarios, I want you to discuss with yourselves what systems of oppression you see in those scenarios. Okay. So we're just going to come back. Okay. So we're just going to come back. So raise your hand if you saw capitalism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy in that scenario. Raise your hand if you saw all four of those systems of oppression in the previous scenario with Africa. Raise your hand if you saw all four systems of oppression in the first scenario with prisons. So it turns out that with each of these different climate scenarios, all of the systems of oppression are involved. And what it means is that we cannot actually combat climate change without combating all four systems of oppression simultaneously. And that's what climate justice is. So what do we do about it? Next slide. So, like I said, my collective Women of Color Speak Out have many different tactics that we use. And one of those tactics is coalition building, because we all need to come together. Because as I said before, everyone suffers. And so my job isn't to tell you in this community what to do. Because in your communities, you know your own communities, you know your own people, and you know what works and what doesn't work. However, it can help to have someone from a different region share with you what they do in their region, because it may spark some ideas. Or you may think, oh yeah, we've been doing that too, and it's validation, right? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm not going to be telling you what to do, I'm just going to be sharing what my people do and what we have done and what we continue to do in the Northwest region as climate justice organizers. Next slide. So Women of Color Speak Out is an all women of color group that began in 2015. Sorry about the size of it. It's because the projector is too far away. We couldn't fix that. The good news is it's all in my head. So we utilize many different styles of leadership, many different tactics. And even though we use all of these different tactics, we have one unifying strategy. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about. Our strength is that we learn from each other. And we use a wide diversity of methods to organize. Because just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting it to work is not smart. Right? We need to do lots of things, because you can't just do one thing and expect it to fix all of the systems of oppression. So, next slide. Again, reminder, trigger warning, deep historical trauma all around the world. You may feel uncomfortable and defensive. That's okay. Feel free to get up, get some food, get some water. It's all good. Next slide. So, Women of Color Speak Out. Our tagline is on the front lines of white and male fragility. Because what we do is we go out and we talk to different communities and we educate them about the struggles of our own people. We speak from our own experiences. And we say, this is what we've gone through. And when someone is saying, this is what I've gone through, it's really difficult to argue with that. And that's an effective tactic. But it also means that we are on these front lines where we have to deal with the violence that is white fragility and male fragility, because people don't want to hear it, right? There are people who don't want to hear that, and we get attacked because of that. But it is something that we all collectively understood. This is something that we're going to have to deal with, because the truth must be spoken. And we know that there are people, even within those demographics, who want to hear the truth because they want to do something drastic to stop this problem. Next slide. So we were born out of a campaign called Shall Know. Has anyone here heard of Shall Know? Okay, so there's a few people. So Shall Know was a campaign that raged in the Northwest. And the reason why we had this campaign was because Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, which is a British and Dutch fossil fuel corporation, decided that they were going to go up to the Arctic and drill for oil in the Arctic using Seattle as their home port, even though our government scientists had said that if they do this, there is a 75% chance of not just one, but two catastrophic oil spills, as well as numerous smaller oil spills. And they decided to do it anyway. And our port of Seattle gave them the permit to do it anyway. So even though we fought at the Port of Seattle, the port didn't care. They continued to just do whatever they wanted. So we all said, well, we are ourselves going to put our bodies on the line to stop you. So we got in kayaks, we did land actions, we locked down in various different ways. We put ourselves anywhere and everywhere to stop them. And it raged for months and months and months. It went all the way from January to September in 2015. It was relentless because the Arctic was at stake. And the Arctic, if the Arctic goes down, we all go down. The Arctic regulates our ocean currents. The Arctic is the world's air conditioning system. If the Arctic is destroyed, it's over. So we understood how deep this problem was, and we also understood that the indigenous peoples of the Arctic had been fighting this for years, and no one had been listening. But what do we have in Seattle? We have white privilege in Seattle. And because we have white privilege, we said we have to speak up. We have to throw down in every possible way because we can do things that they themselves have been trying and doing and no one's been listening. Next slide. So one of the things that we did when we came together as Women of Color Speak Out is, as you'll notice, we're all women of color. And we also noticed that we were in the minority in the Shall No movement. Even though we were all there in solidarity with the peoples of the Arctic, we all understood that people in the global south suffer and people of color suffer the most from climate change. We, as people of color, as women of color, were in the minority in that movement. And we came together and we said, why? Why is this? And we all understood and discussed that the reason why is because the climate movement is extremely racist. The climate movement is massively racist. Even though intellectually they all think they understand, the truth is that white liberals are massively racist and continue to be racist. And so we said, well, we're going to have to change that. And we're going to have to change that doing two things. One, educating the white people so that they understand how to not be violent, how to not be racially violent, even as they think that they're being liberal and progressive. And two, we have to let our own people know that it is their place to be in this movement, that this is their movement, and that not only should they be in this movement, but that they should be in leadership in this movement, because the people on the front lines should always be in leadership. And so the first thing that we did was we went to town hall, and we did an event there, and we got the Seattle local TV station to put it on their TV. We got the local papers to come and they were tweeting out quotes from us. And what we said was, we said that we're changing the climate of climate change. Because we want to change the look of it. We want to change the feel of it. We want to change the culture of it. And if you'll notice, you'll see we are all in our traditional dress. Because the reason why was because people of color in a white supremacist world are always told their story. They're never allowed to tell their own story. And we said, no, we're going to flip that on its head. We're going to show up. We're going to be unabashedly people of color and women of color, and we're going to tell our own story. And that's how we're going to take back this movement. Part of what we were doing was, you can see we're all diverse. We're from different cultures because we wanted to uplift each other's cultures. We wanted to not speak for each other, but to help each other speak for ourselves. And that's why we were all on the stage, all at the same level, all given the same time to speak, and done in a way that was relaxed, that was natural, that was casual, that showed the fact that we were friends and we were family. Next. Interesting things started happening. So one of our collective, our friend right there, she'd never spoken publicly before on the climate issue in her life. In fact, she had only joined the climate movement 2 months previously. And she was extremely nervous because she said, but what do I have to say? And we said, you have the most to say. You, as someone who's new to this movement, needs to speak so that people who are also new to the movement know that they're welcome, know that there's a place for them, and know that we want them on that stage, know that we need their voices. And so she spoke and she blew everyone away. And after the event, the crowd around her was huge because there were so many people who were new to the movement saying, thank you so much for doing this. I feel so much safer here now. Next slide. So after that, we started getting invited everywhere, right? Actually, it wasn't even after that, even before that, as we were like letting people know that we were going to do that town hall, we started getting people inviting us to come and speak places. Because it turns out that when you take your place in a movement, when you take your position of leadership, you don't wait for anyone to give it to you, you take it, it turns out that everyone realizes, oh wait, we desperately needed that. And so we started getting invitations, and one such invitation was to a camp where a whole bunch of activists, mainly white, were in this camp learning how to take action for social justice. And they said, can you come and talk to us about your place in the movement, your thoughts, and what we can do to be better allies? And they asked us that, what can we do to be better white allies in this movement? And what we said is, you need to talk to your own people. Because people of color are exhausted. And not only are we exhausted, it's dangerous. Okay, we get attacked physically, emotionally, and physically, and by the state. We get silenced. It's dangerous. So we need white people to do this labor. And so they took our words to heart, and they did this action called the elephant in the room action. And what they did was they went to the plaza in the center of like downtown Seattle, which is like one of the most popular places, and they created a living room space there. And they said, this is our comfort space of white privilege. And they put a giant inflatable elephant in the middle of that living room space because they said, this is the elephant in the room, racism, and we're going to talk about it. And they sat there and they invited people as they walked past, they invited them to come in and talk. On the side, they had a memorial where they had the names of each of the people of color who had been killed by cops that year. They had what we call cantastoria, which is art that tells the real story. Not the story that you see in the textbooks, but the story that actually happened. We had cantastoria on this side over here where people of color were telling the actual real story. So no matter where people went, they had to learn something and they had to see something, and there was a way for them to engage in that. It was a very smart, sensitive action. And each of the ways in which it was smart and sensitive was because they asked our advice in how to do it. They listened to the people of color who said, that's racist, do it this way. And they listened, and that's how it worked. That action was retweeted 1 million times by the end of that evening. Because when white people talk, people listen. Next slide. After that, we went to the Women's Correctional Facility in Gig Harbor, which is in Washington State. And this was a women's prison, as I said. No one is more incarcerated, no one is more marginalized than incarcerated persons, right? And the truth is that they want to know about this too. They want to learn about this too. And no one's more radical than them either. Next slide. So what we did was we said, okay, how do we explain the climate crisis? How do we explain the root causes in a way that we can get it all done within an hour, which is the time that we had? How do we make the most of the hour, pack it full of as much information as they need, and help them in that way? And so we designed our presentation called Climate Change and Systems of Oppression, where we went through each of the systems of oppression and explained exactly how they connected to climate change. We got to the root causes, and in those root causes, we talked about the prison industrial complex, we talked about animal agriculture, we talked about fossil fuel infrastructure, violence against women, forced labor. And as we were designing this presentation, we looked at each other and we said, are we really going to walk into a prison and talk about the prison industrial complex? We're women of color. Are we going to walk out again? And we looked at each other and we said, fuck yeah, we're going to walk into a prison and talk about the prison industrial complex. Because that's how you show up for marginalized people, right? That's how you share those front lines with them. You show up with them, for them, right? And they told us this is what we want to learn about. So we said, okay, we're going to do it. And we showed up. At that point in time, it included capitalism, racism, and colonialism. Patriarchy was added later because it's such a huge topic that it took time for us to develop that. Next slide. They were the best crowd you've ever had. They were so with it, because you don't have to convince incarcerated persons that the system doesn't work. They know. They're well aware. But they, as with anyone, are wondering how and when and where it went wrong. And so when we went in there and we connected the dots right in front of them, they immediately understood. And they were up in their seats saying, how do we stop this? How do we throw down? We want to throw down right now. And we were like, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't want any of you getting in trouble. Wait until you get out of here. And when you get out of here, then we need you, right? But even then, we're not going to ask you to be on the front lines because we don't want you ending up back in here, right? But we want you to know so that when you talk to your kids, when you talk to your family members, when they come to visit, when you see them, you can be telling them about these things and you can be preparing for when you get out of here. Next slide. After that, a few weeks after that, victory. Shell pulled out of the Arctic. Their stock prices fell by 12 points. They lost, I believe it was $7 billion in profit because our campaign had so thoroughly destroyed their name that even other fossil fuel companies didn't want to be seen with them. It was so thorough. Prince Charles has this committee in which he has all of the CEOs of all of the different fossil fuel companies in this committee. And that's his way of trying to reason with their better nature and tell them about climate change. Shell was kicked out of that committee. And the very next day, they pulled out of the Arctic. That was how far our campaign reached. Next slide. So at this point, we're getting so many invites that we had to spread out to cover more ground. So you see that Afrin went back to the prison to talk about natural healing, and in particular, Ayurveda, which is my people's ancient indigenous practice of natural medicine. There was me at the Whitby Institute at the Pioneers Conference.
Pioneers.
Mm-hmm. They were extremely racist.
Whoa.
Massively racist. That was me. If you actually if you see closer, you'll see I'm crying because I was literally delivering a keynote to a room full of white supremacists who had no clue about their white supremacy the entire weekend, and I had to live through it, and I had to tell them in my keynote exactly what was wrong. And they did not like it. 2 people walked out, but 98 people stayed. And that meant that 98 people actually stayed, sat with their discomfort, sat with their fragility, and were willing to at least try to learn. Here's Yin at the Winter Institute, which was a couple of months later, and she was delivering a keynote, and she was talking about our tactics, she was talking about our methods. And here's Sarah. Sarah was at a symposium, a climate symposium, populated by politicians and scientists, because that's what they call it, a symposium. This is how out of touch with reality these people are, that they don't realize ordinary people are not going to come to a symposium. And Sarah showed up and she said, yeah, you're all the problem. Next slide. So at this point, we had been doing a lot of outreach to white people, trying to educate them, because until we do that work, it's dangerous to bring in people of color who are only going to have to deal with the violence of white supremacy. So after that point in time, we started saying, okay, we feel like it might start to be time to reach out to some of our own people. And we went to the Ethiopian Cultural Center, and Sarah's family is from Ethiopia. And we went there and we said, can we do a presentation on climate change and systems of oppression? They said, yes, absolutely, please do. What we found was that people of all demographics in the south end of Seattle showed up. Ethiopian people, Somalian people, people from other nations showed up, people who were from different religious demographics showed up, people who would not necessarily talk to each other on a daily basis all showed up because there was a thirst to be part of this movement. And there was a thirst for POC leadership and for a safe space to actually learn and talk about this and be part of this. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant. We were humbled, and we learned from them. We were learning from them about what their issues were, what was happening in the South End, what was happening in their different communities. Multi-generational, multi-gender, multi-religion. It was brilliant. Next slide. So at this point, we were coming up to Black Friday, the usual capitalist, relentless consumption. And one of the campaigns that Black Lives Matter was pushing at that time was that we needed to actually shut down the capitalism that is Black Friday. And so we, in coalition with Black Lives Matter, because we are not all black, therefore, when it comes to these particular movements, we take a step back and we show up in solidarity, right? And we let others lead because that's how it should be. And we don't take space in those places. So we showed up in solidarity, shutting down 4th Avenue, which is where a lot of the shoppers go. And we were letting people know, like, do you realize that this $4 sweater that you're buying was made by a woman, probably a woman of color, in a prison, or in a sweatshop somewhere in the global south, or in one of these places where people can't say no to this slave labor? One thing that we learned and that we did was that the people with privilege, we put them on the front lines to shield the black people from the cops. That's really critical. White people need to be on those front lines so that the police have a barrier before they can hurt people of color. This is really critical, really, really important. Next slide. So at this point, we were coming up to the COP21, right? The COP21, which was the last COP of Obama's presidency before we switched presidents. We didn't know what was going to happen. And it literally, essentially, was the last time that we thought there's anything that we can do. If we don't do something drastic at this point in time, we will go into a downward spiral from whence there's no return. So it was critical. And Sarah, who is our one black member, she was going to Paris as part of a delegation to be at that COP21. Because we knew that she was going there, because we knew that the police were cracking down, because we knew that people were being arrested all over the place, because we knew that we didn't know what might happen to her, she's a black woman, we decided to take proactive measures. And those proactive measures were that we made safety videos. What I mean by safety videos is that we recorded ourselves giving our own statements of this is my name, this is who I am, this is where I'm from, and I want you to know I would never leave my people, I would never leave my family, I love my friends, I would never hurt myself, I would never commit suicide, I don't take drugs, I don't drink, all of these things to ensure that if we were taken by the cops, we could blast this video everywhere and prevent them from forcing some violence. We had to have that conversation with each other because we understood how serious this is. And we understood that this happens every single day. And we knew when we came together that at some point we were going to face this. It's happening right now. I don't know if you noticed, we have concentration camps. Yeah. We had to have this conversation because we understood as women of color, we are at risk. We are the most at risk. Next slide. So while Sarah was in Paris, we held solidarity actions in Seattle. There were solidarity actions all over the world. And they were red line actions, right? That last day of the COP21 was called red line because we were talking about this red line that we cannot cross. This red line of fossil fuel usage cannot be breached. We have to take drastic action. And if you have not seen, I was the keynote at that action. You can go online and look for it. We Are the Red Line. It's a video of my speech. It went around the globe. It went viral because I asked people to take a pledge of resistance. And I encourage you to go and look it up. wearetheredline.org. You can just look that up and you'll see the video. Next slide. So taking action is not just the direct action of speaking out against fossil fuel infrastructure. Taking action also means speaking out against false solutions. Okay? Speaking out against carbon taxes that don't actually help the people. Okay? A carbon negative or a carbon neutral tax is not going to help the people, okay? Carbon offsets are not going to help the people. Anything that's a capitalist solution is not going to help when capitalism is a root cause of climate change. So we had a particular campaign which was led by a racist, patriarchal nonprofit called Carbon Moi, who were trying to push this particular legislation, which was going to leave Washington State $4 billion in the hole within a few years. And where was that money going to come from? It was going to come from poor people because their services were going to be cut, Their schools were going to be cut, their housing was going to be cut, their healthcare was going to be cut in order to make up the budgetary difference. And who would be blamed for that? The climate movement. It was a terrible false solution, and we spoke up against it and we stopped it. Next slide. It also means speaking up against politicians always, not just at election time. We have to be in every city council meeting. We have to be in every county council meeting, in every port meeting, right? Now, that obviously is a lot to take on just for a few people. That's why we have to build the movement, so we have enough people to keep showing up so that they know they're always being watched. This was us shutting down Senator Patty Murray's office. Senator Patty Murray is a neoliberal, progressive, white woman senator who was supporting the TPP, who said nothing during Shall No, who has done nothing at all about private prisons, who doesn't care about the school-to-prison pipeline, and we showed up and shut down her office demanding to speak to her. We had an appointment, she just refused to show up. Next slide. So what are we really doing? Right? What we're doing is we're making the resistance unstoppable. If we all come together, if all of these different communities come together, what it means is we're everywhere. Even if they were to take us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, take care. Thank you so much. If we all come together in our different demographics, in our different communities, then we can actually be everywhere, and it's impossible for them to arrest everyone. It's impossible for them to target everyone, right? Especially if the people who are showing up on the front lines are white, right? So we want to build a new system of community where instead of staying in our isolated communities, we actually show up together and we show up in a coordinated way that they don't know how to counteract. Next slide. All we need 3.5% of the population. We don't actually need that many people. Social justice history teaches that 3.5% of the people in continuous non-violent direct action against the system, disrupting the system, will force meaningful change. So we don't waste time trying to talk to Republicans. Right. Why? It doesn't make any sense. What we do is we spend our time talking to the people who say they're with us. Yes. Okay? The people who say they're with us but never show up, those are the people that we talk to. Next slide. So, you went a bit far? Next one? Yes. Okay, so Grace Lee Boggs says, and Grace Lee Boggs passed away just recently. She was an incredible Asian woman of color revolutionary. She was part of the Black Panther Party. And she said, why is nonviolence such an important philosophy? Because it respects the capacity of human beings to grow. It gives them the opportunity to grow their souls. We owe that to each other. So the reason why our movement must be nonviolent is because that movement allows us and each other the opportunity to grow our souls, the opportunity to learn deeper compassion, the opportunity to include more people. Because if it's violent, there are a lot of people who won't be able to take part. Next slide. So soon after that, it was MLK Day. And we don't believe in just having a parade. That is not what MLK Jr. would have believed in or agreed to. MLK Jr. was a direct action activist. MLK Jr. was a revolutionary. So what's happening, and I'm sure what's happening here as well in this city, is gentrification is happening, right? Traditional POC areas are being whitewashed, are being taken over by affluent people with privilege, usually white people, and it's happening in Seattle as well. So we staged a protest, we meaning Women of Color Speak Out, in solidarity with black groups, black community groups, and they staged a protest at 23rd and Union, which is a traditional, a well-known part of the Central District, which is a traditional black area in Seattle. And we staged a protest right outside a marijuana shop. Because ever since marijuana was legalized in Washington State, the white people have been running to cash in. Meanwhile, there are black people still serving prison sentences for non-violent drug offenses. So we held a protest against the gentrification of this marijuana business in the Central District. Meanwhile, I was part of the lineup in front of the federal building downtown to draw the cops. Next slide. Diversions, tactics. Where do we want the cops to be? Where do we not want them to be? And because the cops were down at the federal building, we were able to hold that space and that blockade in front of that business for 3 hours. So MLK Jr. said, I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. He was talking about capitalism. Next slide. So after that, we went to Garfield High. This event was organized by the students. 600 students showed up. That place was so packed, there were youth sitting in the on the steps, in the aisles, because these youth were on fire. One of them saw our climate change and systems of oppression presentation at the Ethiopian Community Center, and they were like, we have to tell everyone about this. Everyone needs to know this is our future that's on the line. And they talked to other youth from other groups, other clubs, all of the different clubs. They talked to the Black Students Union, they talked to the Asian kids, they talked to the Palestinian kids, they talked to the Jewish kids, they talked to the Earth Corps kids, they talked to all of these different youth and got everyone on board. And all of them together did massive outreach, and 600 youth showed up. In this event, we practiced radical progressive stack in the seating. What that meant was that as they were coming in, we told all of the youth, all of the POCs, we want you to sit at the front. All of the POCs come to the front. Now, some people got really upset by that because they said, well, why should the white kids sit at the back? We said, right. Why should the white kids sit at the back, right? Meanwhile, there were POC youth who were also uncomfortable because they were so used to sitting at the back. They didn't want to take a position of leadership. They didn't want to be centered. But we told them, in order to understand climate justice, you need to understand your place in this movement. Next slide. Shortly after that, there was a campaign called Break Free. And Break Free was done all over the world in different places. Break Free meaning break free from fossil fuels. What we did in Washington State was we went up to Anacortes, where there are 4 fossil fuel refineries, and we shut them down for the entire weekend. We shut them down on land. We shut them down on water in kayaks. Just the threat of us coming meant that they canceled 3 shipments from water. That's 1 million each. And that's not including the 3-day oil train blockade that we held on the train tracks. So meanwhile, one of the youth who had organized that Garfield High presentation, they came with us. And we handed them the loudspeaker. And we said, say what you want to say. And they said, what, me? And we said, yeah, you. What is it that you have to say? And they went off. Because it turns out that the youth have plenty to say. And they're brilliant. And they are leaders. And we need them speaking. Next slide. So, as I said, we are constantly confronting the white liberals and the racism within the climate movement. And so we also went to Portland. We're based out of Seattle, but we went down to Portland because nowhere is more white and liberal than Portland. And while we were there, we confronted the nonprofit industrial complex. We talked in detail about the ways in which the nonprofit industrial complex harms the movement. This climate movement has been going on for 50 years now. And it's a giant failure. Why? Because white liberals have been in charge and they keep messing it up. And we let them know and we put them on notice. Next slide. So at this point, Patty joined us. She's our newest member, not new now, but she was new then. So I just want to point out this is Patty. So this is Yin, this is me, this is Afrin, this is Sarah, and then Patty joined us in that June. Next slide. Shortly after that, we went to Seattle Art Museum during their family day because we wanted to reach the little kids too. We wanted the little kids to be able to talk to their parents and to know what to talk about. So one of our youth, Amina, incredible graphic designer, we got her to design a booklet with pictures, with texts that little children would be able to understand. And we talked about the salmon, which is indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. We talked about the Duwamish River and how polluted it is. We talked about the deforestation, and we put those little stories in those, in that booklet, so that when the parents came along and their children came along, they could pick that up and they could read that with their children, so that they could also learn, they could also be part of this movement. Next slide. Shortly after that, we were part of a campaign called Block the Bunker, led by black groups in Seattle. Block the Bunker was a campaign to start, stop the new police precinct from being built. But it wasn't a precinct, it was a bunker. Because when we looked at the plans, it was bomb-proof, bulletproof, had a giant underground bunker which would have space for them to practice military tactics, including with tanks. That's what it was. And they wanted the Seattle City Council to authorize over $160 million for it. And we said, $160 million? I mean, New York just built a new precinct for 20 million. LA just built one for 40 million. Why do they need 160 million? And we looked at the plans and we realized, oh, this is why. Because it wasn't just for the Seattle cops. It was for them to be a base of training for all of the cops around the nation to break our movements. We're getting stronger, so are they. So we said, hell no. And we were part of this campaign called Block the Bunker. Next slide. Maladoma Patrice Some, he said, a true community does not need a police force. The very presence of a law enforcement system in a community is an indication that something is not working. And that something is called the system. And that system is called the systems of oppression. The police force in this country is a system of oppression. It is a tactic that those in power use to keep the rest of us down. Next slide. And what we realized in that is that patriarchy is the biggest obstacle. And patriarchy is enforced with the cops. So while we were in that movement, we were at a city council meeting, protesting that meeting. And while we were there, I was sexually harassed by one of the supporters of the cops. He sexually harassed me. I defended myself. I called for help. The entire movement came to help me and shielded me. The city council, their security, tried to have me arrested. They tried to have me arrested. They said it was my fault because I wasn't quiet. And they let the person who sexually harassed me just walk away. Even as I was telling them, that person just sexually harassed me, they let them walk away and they said, be quiet. And then the cops showed up with their hands on their guns. If the entire movement had not been with me, I might not be around today. So what happened was that the cops leaked video, and it was my own video, because I had been outside with the media recording for the movement, and this guy sexually harassed me in the middle of that. So I recorded the entire thing. The cops leaked that to the media, who then spread it around with the title, "Do you consider this sexual harassment?" Which led to widespread doxing and trolling. I was attacked so thoroughly, it was global. It was global, and it was for months and months and months. And so online, offline, on my phone, email, social media, and in person, I have been stalked all over the world. All over the world. I've been stalked in airports. I've been stalked in cities. I've been stalked walking down the street. I've been stalked in my own familiar restaurants that I go to. What we see is the patriarchy wants to control you by making you afraid. The patriarchy wants to shut you up. And what they do is they try to intimidate you and they try to threaten you. I got rape threats, I got death threats, I got bomb threats, I got gun threats. And not only me, but my own community members got threats directed at me. I would get phone calls in the middle of the night with my friends on the phone crying, saying, "Where are you? Are you okay? They said that they got you and that they were going to gang rape you." So my entire community was terrorized for months. Next slide. So what did I do? I made a series of videos that I released explaining what was happening in this situation. Because when the patriarchy wants to silence you, you do not be quiet. When the patriarchy wants to silence you, you use that opportunity to educate. You use that opportunity to explain to people what is sexual harassment. By the way, this was before Me Too. Yeah. This was about, I'm not sure, about 6 months before Me Too. So these videos went viral. There are now groups around the country that use them as part of their anti-patriarchy trainings. Because I deliberately designed them to be used in that way. And I released them. What you'll notice is, and so you can look them up online, it's called the Zarna Response series. It's got 4 parts. And of the 4 parts, the most watched, the most viewed, and the most shared was the second. The most troll videos that were made were directed at the second video. Why? The second video was about internalized oppression. Internalized oppression is about how people of color and women keep each other down. Because we've internalized the systems of power. And because we've internalized them, we think we have to protect them. So I was in that video talking about how I had been harmed by other women in this whole process. What hurt the most was the people of color and the women who came after me, and they were there. They were definitely there. They were there because it meant that they got more views on their social media. It meant that they were more popular with all of these men. It meant that they got more hits on their Instagram account. So this was happening and this was real. So what we noticed is the video that got attacked the most was this one. Why? Because this video was my educating my own people to say we have to come together, and it was effective. Next slide. So we must dismantle internalized oppression. It's their biggest threat. Don't waste time trying to talk to the other side. Spend time talking to the people who are on your side. Get them to show up. Get them to understand what is in their best interests. Patriarchy thrives on fear, so we're intimidated into silence. Capitalism thrives on isolationism, so we consume and consume and consume to fill the void. But that's not going to fill it. Objects, things are not going to fill it. What's going to fill it? Community. Coming together, friendship, family, love. That's what's going to help us. Racism thrives on scapegoating. So we criminalize each other. So we blame each other. So people of color fight each other. So women fight each other. So queer and trans people fight each other. And everyone's trying to keep each other down. Colonialism thrives on divide and conquer so that we don't unite. In order to dismantle the systems of oppression, we have to come together, unite in love, in friendship, in family, and not be intimidated, because we must love more than we fear. So, patriarchy, like when you look at all of the systems of oppression, what you see is the root of them is patriarchy. Because if we did not believe that we are only a body, no one would be able to convince you that the color of your skin matters. No one would be able to convince you that your gender matters. No one would be able to convince you that your sexuality matters. No one would be able to convince you that the species of someone matters. If patriarchy was not there, colonialism, racism, capitalism wouldn't exist. Patriarchy is the root of all evil, therefore we must defeat patriarchy. And patriarchy, what did I say earlier, comes from the ego. That means it's a spiritual problem. That's why this must be a spiritual movement. That's why all of these liberal atheist white people have failed for so long. Because they refused to connect with people on a heart level. They refuse to see the soul in someone else. They refuse to respect the culture of indigenous people, of people of color. They refuse to see the humanity. What they wanted to do was preserve their privilege. Next slide. So in order to dismantle this, we have to keep each other spiritually nourished, because otherwise we'll burn out. This movement is exhausting. It's from every side. So we keep each other spiritually nourished and we heal together. That means we do sweat lodge, we do yoga, we do meditation, we do other methods of healing. However, we only do them under the guidance of decolonized lineage holders. Don't do yoga under some random white woman's class. She is not from an authentic, authorized lineage that has given her permission to teach yoga. Don't go to some sweat lodge run by some white person who's not been given permission by indigenous elders to run that sweat lodge, right? You have to go to the cultures of these traditions and with their permission do that healing. If you do it in any other way, you are simply perpetuating colonialism, racism, capitalism, and patriarchy. Next slide. Within our collective, we try very hard to show up for each other because remember, we're diverse, right? We're from all over the global south. Sarah's family is from Ethiopia, my family is from India. Our friend's family is also from India, but a different caste and a different practice. Yin's family is from Taiwan. Rihanna, who is our trans woman of color sister, she's not part of WOCSO, but she's definitely one of our close friends and allies. She is from American Samoa. So, and our different youth, they're from different parts, from West Africa, from China, from all of these different parts of the world, because we want different people to come together. And that means we need to learn each other's issues. That means we need to learn about the different things that harm our communities and show up for each other in those ways. For example, in the Zarna Response series, I called out my own Indian community for their silence regarding police brutality. It's not like we don't suffer from police brutality, we do. But it's just so exhausting to deal with it that we don't talk about it. But we must talk about it. If not for ourselves, we need to show up in solidarity with black people and other brown people. And I said that in the Zarna Response series. I called out my own because that's required too. Next slide. We must smash that colonizers divide and conquer tactic. That means we show up in solidarity with indigenous people. We show up in solidarity with other people of color. We show up in solidarity with queer and trans communities. We show up in solidarity with people with disabilities, right? We show up in solidarity for animals. We show up in solidarity for nature herself, who's not given a voice in a white supremacist patriarchal empire. Next slide. We take part in transformative justice, right? Because in order to move away from this punitive criminal justice system and from this system of cops who came from slave catchers, right? In order to move away from that, we need to start practicing better ways of dealing with conflict. And one particular practice that Patricia actually comes from is indigenous Tlingit tribal peacemaking circles. Now, these peacemaking circles are an indigenous practice that they did for thousands upon thousands of years. They never had a police force, they never had a jail. So we need to learn from those people and we need to take their leadership. We need to pay them to help us do these practices. That's decolonizing. That's coming together with compassion. And instead of blaming each other, instead of scapegoating each other, we can actually listen to our problems, listen and help each other heal. Because when we do that, it won't happen again. Next slide. It's okay to mess up. You're going to mess up. I've messed up. Every single one of us in WOCSO has messed up. It's okay. It's not okay to not own up to messing up. It's not okay to not take responsibility, and it's not okay to not learn so that you don't do it again. So what we talk about is the fact that we have to be accountable to our communities. We have to be accountable to marginalized communities, particularly queer and trans people of color. Okay, particularly queer and trans people of color, because even within the queer and trans community, it's people of color who are the most marginalized, and it's trans women of color most likely to die from the cops or most likely to die, just straight up die. So when someone tells you that you've hurt them, listen. Don't react with fragility. You will feel fragility, but stop. Don't react with that. Listen. Take on what they've told you. Listen to what they say when they tell you, this is what I need for you to do so that you don't hurt me. Right? Take on those instructions. Learn, practice it over and over again. Okay? And don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect forgiveness. What often happens in the movement is that people with privilege will mess up, and then someone will tell them that they've messed up, and then they may show fragility, they may not, but then they say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And they expect the person who's been hurt to say, it's okay. They don't have to tell you that, because it wasn't okay. And you are not entitled to forgiveness. No one's entitled to forgiveness. We're entitled to become better people. We're entitled to learn from our mistakes. We're not entitled to someone's emotions and forgiveness. So be humble, listen, learn, follow the guidance and experience of radical POC leadership, of radical indigenous leadership, particularly women of color, particularly queer and trans people of color. Stay on guard against your ego. Before you do anything, ask yourself, where is this coming from? Is this coming from my ego? Do I need to center myself in this moment? In what way can I step back and center people with less privilege than me? Right? Don't be a savior, and don't be a fake feminist. We don't need that. Next slide. So, in doing that, let's actually disrupt the system. That means we need to build radically sustainable housing, because the system of housing that we have right now is destroying the planet, right? The air conditioning that we use on a regular basis is destroying the planet, right? So Earthship housing is one particular thing. If you do not know what Earthship housing is, look it up. Earthship housing and the 6 principles of radically sustainable housing. 6 principles of radically sustainable housing. Any structure can be shifted to follow these principles. Any structure, okay? So it can be done anywhere. Next slide. We keep each other fed and watered with healthy plant-based food. If we don't feed each other, we're saying we don't love each other. Okay? You can't have a meeting at 6 p.m. and expect people to show up from work and not be hungry. Of course they're going to be hungry. If you're not going to feed them, they're not going to show up because they're starving. Okay? If we don't make sure that we're eating, that we're drinking, that we're making sure people drink water, what are we doing out here protecting water? Right? We need to keep each other thriving and healthy. We need to be asking each other, when we see each other, have you eaten? Have you had water? Did you rest today? Did you have any time for yourself? Did you have any time to do any spiritual healing? This week, today, have you had any time for that? This is necessary. Next slide. We work with elders. When we shut down Senator Patty Murray's office, we showed up with the Raging Grannies. The Raging Grannies, I'm not sure if you have one of those groups here. The Raging Grannies is, yeah, it sounds like you do. They're a group that operate, it started in Canada, but it's all over this continent. And they're a group of radical, elderly women, mostly white women, but they have some POC women in there. And they know that it's their job as elders and as white women to show up to shield the POC and the youth from police brutality. And they showed up with us. And because they were with us, Senator Patty Murray's staff couldn't do anything. What were they going to do? Arrest elderly white women in Senator Patty Murray's office? And Senator Patty Murray is an elderly white woman? Next slide. Well, not necessarily elderly. She's an older one. Okay, we speak the truth without fearing it. Smash respectability politics. Patriarchy will teach you that you must always be polite. And they'll tell you what polite means too. You know what polite is? Speaking the truth. You know what polite is? Showing up when someone's been hurt and telling the people who've hurt them, stop doing that. You know what's polite? Protecting Mother Earth. It's really polite to future generations. So we need to relearn what it means to be respectable. Respectable means don't be a snitch. Respectable means cops aren't our friends. That's what respectable means. Next slide. So, oh, hang on, sorry, did you go too far? Oh yeah, okay. So Standing Rock and the Women's March. So we were at Standing Rock, we were also at the Women's March. And don't forget, this was happening while I was being doxxed. While I was being doxxed, while I was being stalked, we still showed up in these places. Why? Because patriarchy thrives on fear and intimidation. It is used to silence you. So if you don't show up after that, they won. Right? So I showed up and I was one of the speakers at the Seattle Women's March, which had like 200,000 people. Wow. Right? And there were cops everywhere. And the white women were shaking their hands. Thank you so much for protecting us, officer. And the white women showed up with pink pussy hats. Racist and transphobic, that's what that is. Because not every vagina is pink, and not every woman has a vagina. So the white women wore their pink hats with pride, thinking they were doing such a great thing, shaking the hands of the cops, not realizing that every woman of color and every trans woman who was there and every non-binary person who was there and every genderless person who was there was mortally offended. Next slide. We also did a presentation on desirability politics, because desirability politics operates also within POC communities. Those who are light-skinned, those who are pretty, those who have passing privilege, those who have money, those who have academic privilege, those who have able-bodied privilege. These are all different ways in which the system, the white supremacist patriarchal empire, convinces us that we're more desirable than other people. So what we did was we came together and we talked about how we had been hurt by this and how we had also been part of keeping that system going. And we also talked about how we can use desirability politics to subvert the system. I don't know if you noticed, but our very first event, our town hall, we were looking pretty good. We did that on purpose. We did that on purpose because we knew that if we look cool, if we look stylish, if we look glamorous, people are more likely to listen to us. And once they're here, we subvert the entire conversation and talk about what really needs to be talked about. Right? So in this panel, you could, when you go to our Facebook page, WOC Speak Out on Facebook, you can see the video of that as well. There's video of all of this stuff on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. Next slide. So we were also at the CBEC conference in June, which is a Fellowship of Reconciliation conference. Fellowship of Reconciliation, white, liberal, spiritual people who are also massively racist. We showed up there specifically because the POC youth who were in that space asked us to show up there. And they asked us to show up there and they said, please do what you can to dismantle the white supremacist patriarchy in this space because it is hurting us so badly. So we did, and we spent the entire weekend dismantling that stuff. Next slide. We train allies to do their own work. So one of the things that I do is I mentor white men in how to dismantle toxic white masculinity. I also mentor white women in how to dismantle white feminism. Those pink hats, right? All of that. How do we dismantle that? It's so deeply ingrained. All of these white women yoga teachers making money off of my people's ancient wisdom. How do we dismantle that? We need white women to show up and do that work, right? So in doing this work, I can't be everywhere. And it's not safe for me to be everywhere. So I need allies, and my sisters need allies, and my community needs allies, whether it's white men, whether it's white women, to show up in these spaces and speak. Next slide. So we also want new speak out groups, right? We want other POC groups because we don't want to speak for the POCs in this city. We don't want to speak for the native people in this state. We don't want to speak for, the people of Standing Rock or any of those people. We want everyone to be inspired to start their own groups, to be their own leadership, right? To speak for themselves, to tell their own story. So we encourage youth, we encourage men of color, we encourage students of color, we encourage elders of color, we encourage queer and trans people of color, we encourage disabled people of color to speak up and tell their story because everyone needs to learn from them. Next slide. This was at us at a follow-up event at Garfield High, which was organized again by POC youth, and they were on fire. Next slide. So none of this is easy. You may have noticed. None of this is easy. All of these things that I've told you about, I wouldn't tell you to do any of those things if I had not done them myself. Okay, because there's a lot of people out there saying, plant food, and they've never once picked up a trowel and done the work, right? There's a lot of people out there saying, do this work, but they've never done the actual labor. I've done all of these things, and WOCSO has done all of these things that we're telling you about, because all of these things are necessary. It would be really great if people could say, okay, I really love working on housing, I'm going to focus on that. I really love power, I'm going to focus, solar panels, I'm really going to focus on that. I really love planting food, I'm going to focus on that. We need people to do those things, but we don't have those people doing those things in every community, which is why we have to do everything. It's not fair to us, right? It's not fair to us. We need people to show up. One thing that's really important, the people that we are working with to do these things, we have to make sure that they want to be there. Because if they don't want to be there, it's punitive, right? It's punishment. No one wants to be punished, and it won't change anything. It won't transform, right? So in doing this work, we appeal to people at a heart level. We appeal to people at a soul level because we're connected, we're family. This is a family of humanity. This is Mother Earth's children. And in doing that, we get people to want to show up. And when we do, it transforms whole communities. We know that someone wants to do this work if they, are committed to lifelong anti-patriarchy training. This isn't fixed in a 2-hour seminar, right? That's not how this works. We have to be doing this work continuously every day. If they are committed to that, if they implement what we teach them immediately, if they show up consistently, if they're financially accountable. In other words, they're not taking what we've taught them and going and making money off of it. That happens all the time in this movement. White people in this movement learn from women of color, then they go and they start their own training sessions charging people. Meanwhile, they don't tell anyone that it was the women of color who taught them this for free. So that money should be going to the women of color, not them. So in doing this work, we protect our intellectual rights. We say, no, you learned it from this, and we record everything so everyone knows who was here, what was said, at what date, at what point in time, and it goes on social media. And if anyone messes that up, we've got receipts, okay? And we call them out for it. It's not okay. It's not okay to make money off of us, because that's only perpetuating the system of capitalism, right? So if they don't run away from their own fragility, but they're willing to have a dialogue, they're willing to learn, they're willing to show up, and they're willing to hold each other accountable, that's how we know someone's committed to doing this work, okay? One time when I was mentoring white women, one of the women said, so one collective that I'm in, we started talking, it was a really big collective, and then we started talking about racial justice, and after 3 months, there were only 4 people in this group. And I mean, that's terrible. How do we get back all of those people who are lost? And I said, so what you're really telling me is there were only ever 4 people in this group, and doing this work, you managed to weed out all the posers, and now you've got the quality people who are actually going to go and smash the patriarchy. Next slide. Remember, we only need 3.5% of the population. Margaret Wheatley said, there is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. No power for change greater. Next slide. This famous quote, why do we close our eyes when we pray, cry, kiss, dream? Because the most beautiful things in life are not seen, but felt only by the heart. They're felt only by the heart. Capitalism is not beautiful. These external things are not beautiful. The things that we feel in our hearts, that is beautiful. Next slide. So decolonize your mind, heal, walk the path of love. That's how we do this. That's how we're going to win. And that's the only way that we're going to win. Next slide. And that's it. This is our contact information. This is for Women of Color Speak Out on Facebook. We are WOC Speak Out on YouTube. If you look for Women of Color Speak Out, we have a channel. Most of our videos are on Facebook. That's our email. And that's our website, wocspeakout.com. If you go on there and you click on resources, you'll actually see videos, books, documentaries, campaigns to follow, and you can learn more about this. from that, as well as watching our videos, watching our presentations and stuff. And if you, feel free to take a picture of it if you want. And then this is my contact information. This is me on Facebook, the real Zarna Joshi. There are a lot of fake Zarna Joshi profiles because I have a lot of haters and trolls. So no, there's no, don't move it, don't move it. But just take a picture of it. So the real Zarna Joshi, and then on YouTube, there are a million hate videos on me on YouTube. So look for my channel, the Zarna Joshi channel. And then this is my email, zarnajoshi@forthepeople.earth. And if you want to contribute to my work, you can go to forthepeople.earth/Zarna, and people donate there. I'm a For the People organizer, which means I do this work for free, and if people care about my work, they donate into my fund, and that's what I use to pay my bills. So that's it. Thank you so much. We can turn the lights on, and if we have any questions, I'm willing to take questions, and then we should wrap up really soon. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
About the healing spaces, don't you feel like it's very important for white people to not be in certain spaces of healing as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are certain spaces of healing that each demographic needs to have to themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So there are certain spaces of healing where white men need to just be with white men because no one else needs to hear that, right? And people of color need to be just with people of color because they don't need to have white people there. And women need to be just with women, and queer and trans people need to be just with their communities. So, and indigenous people sometimes need to be only with indigenous people or in a POC space, right? So yes, absolutely there are spaces that white people shouldn't be in, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be spaces for them. And often, so the way that we do it is even I mentor white men, right? So we have a healing circle that we operate. I show up to witness that space because you can't have white men alone, unsupervised, okay? We can't have that because white men will go off on all kinds of tangents and it will get wonky really quick, okay? So I show up to witness that space and to guide that space. Right? But the majority is white men, and it's a safe space for that. And because they know me, because they have a relationship with me, because they trust me, it works. And similarly, I do the same thing for white women, right? But we need that within, and it's really not fair that I have to show up and be in those spaces, right? It's not fair that I have to show up and be in those spaces, but I'd rather it be me than someone else who doesn't want to deal with it. Yeah, who doesn't want to deal with it, or who will let them get away with things, or who will be harmed by it, right? So yes, and also we also need healing spaces for white people too, because everyone needs healing. Next slide. Sorry, not next slide. Next question. So used to saying that. If I'd had a remote control, that wouldn't be in my mind.
How long are you going to be here?
I'm here until Sunday.
There's a march tomorrow at Zarna Joshi.
I think we're doing an event in Slidell tomorrow. Yeah, I'm doing the same presentation in Slidell tomorrow, so yeah, definitely.
As a workers group, it's like a POC led.
Awesome. Thank you for doing the work.
How can we get trained by you to be able to, I guess, like what you were talking about, training people to lead trainings and stuff like that?
Yeah, so contact me, email me, and we can have a dialogue. We can talk about how to do that, how to make that happen. And yeah, we can do that. Just get in contact with me and we can have that conversation.
Are you already working with Extinction Rebellion?
Yes, I'm in contact with Extinction Rebellion people, yeah. So Extinction Rebellion, like I said, so I know of them and I have been in contact with them. I'm not working with them because they're hella racist. And there are various problematic things. Now, there are certain things that they've been blamed for that were not necessarily their fault, but then there are certain things that they definitely did that are a serious problem. So, for example, one of the things I asked them when I first met them is I said, okay, what is your plan for the people of color and the indigenous people at these actions who are going to be targeted for the most police brutality? And they went, oh, that's a good question.
Are you talking about here in the US or in the UK?
This is in the worldwide Extinction Rebellion movement. I asked this question of them, and they looked like a deer caught in the headlights. They did not have an answer for that question. And it's really simple. It's really simple. Oh, yeah, we're going to have the white people on the front lines. Yeah, we're going to keep all of the money that we raise and prioritize people of color and native people with that money. These are simple things that you can do as the mainstream white liberal movement to prioritize the safety of people of color. They had not even considered that. And I said, I'm not risking my life with you. Why would I do that? Why would I encourage any POCs to join that movement when I know that that's what they're going to get and they're going to be left out to dry by these people? Right? No, it doesn't mean that you can't learn, and I encourage you to learn, so get in contact with me, right? And we can talk about it. Next slide. Next question. Hang on. Sorry, over here. I'll go with this person and then come back to you.
Yeah, we're starting and thinking about your group, and I've been working with 50 before still. And we have this slideshow with the talk, and what you say, it's not really totally new to me, but it is so important to make those connections between the power structures and climate change, and it just illustrates how hard it is to change that.
Yep.
Which makes me think, gosh, does it really just take 3.5% of the population? Because it is a massive change. It's much more massive than saying to block shelf from drilling in the Arctic. It is the whole power structure, and we can expect the corresponding violence, from those in power. Right?
Yeah. So every social justice movement of the last century has only needed 3.5% to make meaningful change. It is possible. And they were dealing with a lot worse than we are, right? It's only now starting to really show up in terms of how bad it is. Now, indigenous people have always known, black people have always known. It's only now that the white people are starting to realize, oh, wow, this is like fascism, right? This is actually fascism. They're only now starting to realize it. People of color have been fighting this for centuries, and they know this. We don't need all of the people. We need 3.5%, and history has proven this. And see, the thing about 3.5% is, when it's 3.5%, everyone knows at least one person who cares about that movement. Whether it's their own child, whether it's their own parent, whether it's their friend, whether it's their coworker, whether it's their boss, whether it's their teacher, whether it's their pastor. Everyone knows at least one person, and that one person will have influence. And the more that they see, oh my goodness, it's not just my child, it's all of these people. Even though it's only 3.5%, it feels like it's everywhere. That's why I say we have to be everywhere. We just have to feel like we're everywhere. Because in that sense, we are everywhere, because the message is everywhere. Right? And that's what we've seen from social justice movements throughout history is we are everywhere, the message is everywhere, and that's what changes things. But when I say changes things, I mean at a heart level. Okay? That's why it has to be a spiritual movement. Right? That's why MLK Jr., he used the rhetoric that he used. And by the way, he learned that from Gandhi. Right? And also Gandhi, by the way, is uplifted as like the leader of like India's struggle. Gandhi was only one leader. There were multiple other leaders who were also, leading in various different ways, also running their own spiritual movements. That was what got the people. But not everyone in India could show up for that movement. It was less than 3.5%, but it seemed like we were everywhere. Because you only need a few people to shut down the entrance to a factory.
I feel like we have such a long way to go. Like even within the movements, like I helped with the Sunrise movement here, and like we had a 45-minute long conversation around our last meeting about like our messaging and who we're trying to talk to, and like that whole idea of 3.5%, and the fact that we aren't even connected to like POC grassroots organizations in the city.
Yeah.
Like that was our
right.
I kind of try to consider myself a liaison, like tries to like connect all these groups, but it's still it's like I can't, like I don't have that power like to do that either. But it's just like the awareness that that's something that needs to be done.
Well, get in contact with me and we can talk about it. You had a follow-up question?
Just that I'm absolutely convinced that this is essential. I came in here almost in tears after like what's been going on, and I was like, this is exactly what I needed to hear right now.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that this is the
Take care. Thank you.
You know, and in particular being involved with Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah.
I know that there is a desire there, at least among some people, to really concretely, spiritually embrace this.
Yes.
So
Yes. Thank you.
I'm so glad we met.
Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, like, when we talk about how much work there is to do, it's easy to feel disheartened, right? But what did I say right at the end? I said, decolonize your mind, heal, and walk the path of love. And when you do that, you will never be too tired to smash the patriarchy. Because you can't get up without thinking about it. You can't go to sleep without thinking about it. You'll dream about it. And in doing so, when you connect with people at a heart level, it will reinforce your energy. It will motivate you. It will inspire you. Oh my God, I've made my family even bigger, right? My community is expanding in a way that I never dreamed that it could expand, because capitalism had convinced me that I was alone in the world and that money was everything, and that I had to hold on to this capitalist job, and I had to please my patriarchal masters. And we start to realize, oh wait, that's not true. Oh wait, if we just ask for help, there's someone actually willing to show up, right? One of the tactics that we use, and I didn't talk about it, well, actually I did, is the idea that we're not shy about saying, no, we all need help. Everyone needs help, okay? So, and the marginalized people need help more than anyone, right? If you want people of color to show up at your action, you better pay them. Because they got work, okay? They got work, they got kids, they got a roof that they're struggling to keep over their heads, okay? It's not that they don't care, it's that they don't have the freedom to show up in a way that middle-class white people do. Middle class. All that means is that you're just another type of worker. Any other questions? Okay, we need to wrap up soon, I know, Sani, thanks. Oh, really? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, just really quickly, Extinction Rebellion has had recent developments in which they brought on a new national coordinator for the U.S., who is indigenous, and who helped write a fourth demand that is all about indigenous sovereignty and leadership. And they brought on multiple indigenous leaders onto the national team for the U.S.
Yeah.
That's happened just in the last couple of weeks.
That's great.
And so we're really excited about bridging, like working together, and hopefully unlearning all the shit that we've learned that has been a barrier so far.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Keep in mind that they had that chance earlier, and they didn't take it.
I see. It took so much.
And it took messing up again and again and again and again for them to finally realize. And even then, they're still going to ignore most of what they're told. They'll carry on doing the same thing, right? So, you know, what really helps is for the white people to actually begin all of their work with racial justice training. Extensive racial justice training. And when you and when you do that, and you continue to do that, and then you do extensive anti-patriarchy training, and when you continue to do that, then you become a safer person to actually be in community with people of color and indigenous people. Okay? If you're already reaching out to the people of color, but you haven't done any of that work, it's only going to end up in violence that the people of color have to deal with. And I know, because I'm one of those people of color. Right? That's why when I was in that phone call, I was like, you want me to risk my life and go to prison for your movement? Nope. Nope. Not when you clearly don't care about the fact that I'm going to be on the receiving end of police brutality that you can't even dream of. Right? So that needs to be stressed by the white people in Extinction Rebellion. Hey everyone, we need to stop and do serious anti-racism training and anti-patriarchy training, and I have this great contact, and we need to pay this person and any other people of color that we reach out to train us. That's what you need to do. Yeah. Any other questions?
Have you heard of the, what is it, AMBAR program? Anti-racism training?
I am not part of it. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you know about that.
There are a lot of different programs all over the, like in our region in Seattle, we've got Youth Undoing Institutional Racism who do a really brilliant anti-racism training, which focuses on the Black community. You know, and meanwhile, like right now, I'm actually in the process of developing a educational presentation about Hindu phobia, so that people understand about the violence my people have been through. Because no one knows, even in the social justice movement, no one knows what my people have been through, and they do massively oppressive things to my people while calling themselves spiritual. Did anyone who hasn't asked a question yet have a question to ask? Because I just want to make sure there's space.
Sure. You're the woman from Taiwan.
Yin.
Yin. Yes. In terms of like Asians in the model minority myth, has she spoken about that? And
Yes.
How that is there like a tension being Asian and having people relate them to white people when they're people of color and
Yes.
having that disparity?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you watch our desirability politics panel, she talks about that at length, because that's one of the things, that you're desirable because you're a model minority, except it's a lie,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So after you put your group together, you just go separate way to
At the beginning, we did everything together because it wasn't safe for us to go anywhere alone, right? So we did everything together because it was too dangerous for any of us to go anywhere alone. Once we became better known and we were teaching different allies, then it became easier for us to go to different places by ourselves because our allies would come with us. So for example, in this particular trip, my friend over here has come, and then my friend Kathy has been managing this whole thing. So my group didn't need to manage this whole thing. Right? It was Kathy who was actually here saying, hey, we'd love for you to come over here and do this presentation and share these things with this community over here and in this region. So I'm like, cool, let's do it. You know, if we go where we're invited, right? So in different regions, depending on who's asked or who is, you know, like who's in contact with those particular people or that particular community, that one of us will go. And sometimes we try to go together for safety and also so that, you know, you can hear from more than one of us. You know, it definitely helps to hear from more than one of us, which is why I encourage all of you to go to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And also For the People, so my group called For the People is POC organizers, and it's me, my friend Derek, and my brother Derek and my brother Antonio, and we're going to be taking on more. But that nonprofit is about grassroots organizers who need to do, who do this work full time regardless. But in order to do this full time, they need to be able to pay their bills. So so For the People has that fund for them, so that people can donate into that fund, and it's a tax deductible donation that they can make sure that they're paying for their community organizer to do that work full time, not have to worry about getting a capitalist job. So I encourage you to look at For the People. That's also on Facebook as well. You saw my contact there. And we do a great deal of work as well. So for example, my brother Derek, who is Japanese American, he created the Rapid and Just Climate Action Teams. And what that means is it's principles of organizing that are radical, anti-patriarchy, anti-racism, decolonizing, anti-capitalist, radical principles of organizing to bring about rapid and just action, because that's what we need, right? Because we're in extinction rebellion, right? We're in mass extinction, so we need rapid action, but it needs to be just. So he, with me and with Kamal Patel, who is another man of color, we came together and we drafted these principles of organizing. And in bringing together teams, everyone looks at these principles, talks about them, understands what they are, and then, okay, what are the ideas that we have to make a difference in the next 2 months? What are we going to change in the next 2 months in our community? Whether it's putting solar panels on 10 houses, whether it's planting 5 gardens, whether it's changing the housing with radically sustainable principles, et cetera, right? Whether it's getting 500 people to say, I will not buy a car that runs on oil, right? Any of those things, but within 2 months, go, hit it, do it, done, right? Come back, regroup, how did it go? What do we need to learn? What do we learn from it? What do we take going forward? What's the next thing that we're going to do? So look that up too. And if you go to forthepeople.earth, that's our website, forthepeople.earth, the Rapid and Just Climate Action, there's a tag for that, RJCA. Click on that. The document is there. You can download it as a PDF. You can look it up, come together in your teams, contact him and say, hey, we want to do this. How do we work together? forthepeople.earth. Yeah. Any grassroots organization. It could be any grassroots organization, but you need to understand these principles of organizing. You need to be accountable. You have to be, first and foremost, understanding that this is a spiritual movement. All of those things are in the document. Yeah. Sorry, any other questions from anyone who hasn't asked before? Yeah?
Have you ever thought about like funding some artists or something, having like a big show to raise money for our organization?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So we do that. So For the People holds fundraisers for our different people, and actually we're coming up to our annual fundraiser, which is for the people itself, so that we can pay for, our website and our operations and our, like expenses, our financial, stuff that we have to deal with. So that fundraiser is coming up in November. November 9th is our annual fundraiser, and then Antonio Zamora's fundraiser, he's one of our other organizers, his fundraiser is coming up in October, and we're also looking to launch 1, maybe 2 new organizers in the next 6 months or so as well. So those fundraisers will also be happening. If you follow us on Facebook, you can see that stuff, and then you can also go to our website. You can look at any and all of our people and donate to whoever you want to donate to as well. So, if you like what this organizer is doing, you can donate to them. If you want to donate to all of them, you can donate to all of them. If you want to donate just to For the People and say, I want to support this, group that's helping all of these people, you can do that too. Does that make sense? And then For the People, Women of Color Speak Out has had fundraisers. We haven't had any recently because we're just too busy. Like, we're too busy. What we actually need is we need allies to run these fundraisers for us so we don't have to do the labor. That's what we need allies to be like, hey, everyone, we're going to fundraise for Women of Color Speak Out because they're doing awesome work and all that money is going to go to them, and then they will use that money to, put on their, events and their actions and all of those things. We don't have time. Like, we're exhausted. We're working 16 hours a day on this movement, so it's exhausting, and I wish we did more fundraisers, but we haven't done one in a long time. Like, my fundraiser for the People was the last one, but that was because we were launching For the People, and I was like, okay, I got to do this, So we did it, and I'll probably try and do one once every year. Hey.
Hi.
How you doing?
Doing fine.
Any other questions? Yeah, you had one.
I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how we develop and nurture and handle the spiritual aspect of the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, I'm part of a movement in Cancer Alley or Death Alley, and it's a spiritual movement, but that community is pretty much Christian, and so it's a Christian-based movement, which isn't really feasible, in my opinion, to have one religion, obviously. So how do we kind of bring everyone together, including people of those faiths, but also maybe other faiths, and feed that spiritual movement? That's inclusive.
So the question is, how do we create, or how do we implement a spiritual movement when you've got people from different religions and different spiritual backgrounds? So the first thing is to not exclude anyone on the basis of their religion, right? That regardless of what background someone is from, regardless of what spiritual tradition, what religious tradition, everyone is welcome, and everyone's spiritual beliefs, they are welcome to those beliefs. We encourage their spiritual beliefs because that's what's going to root them in this movement, right? The one thing to understand about a spiritual movement, regardless of what background anyone is from, is to understand that you're much more than your body, right? And you don't have to believe in God in order to know that, right? You don't have to be part of any particular religion whether it's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, you don't have to be part of any Eastern philosophy like my own tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. You don't have to be indigenous to understand any of these things. To understand, you are much more than your body. And even if you were to look at yourself as just a body, this body has come from Mother Earth. When you die, this body will go back to Mother Earth. Therefore, whatever you do must be in service to Mother Earth, because whether you exist or not, she always will. Right? So in understanding what it means to be spiritual, we have to see that the world is much larger than just ourselves. And that our own identity is much more than this physical gross matter. Right? I'm much more than my skin color. I'm much more than whether or not I'm considered desirable in a white supremacist patriarchy. I'm much more than how able-bodied I am. Right? I'm much more than my sexuality. Right? And unfortunately, white feminism reinforces all of those oppressions. Right? You can do anything. You can have a career and a man. You can have kids. You can have a house. You can have everything. You can have it all, sister, except trans women. Not them, because they don't have vaginas. Right? White feminism reinforces all of those things. So it's not spiritual. Is it, right? Understanding that we're much more than our bodies. We're much more than a body part. We're much more than a function of our body, right? We're much more than that. Allows for us to see the humanity in everyone, including animals, right? It helps us to see Mother Earth has rights too. Mother Earth deserves a chance to consent also. I don't know if you noticed, but all of these natural disasters that are happening, that's Mother Earth saying no. That's Mother Earth saying, you are not allowed. I do not consent to this. I feel violated. Now, I don't say it's the rape of Mother Earth, because we have to be very careful with the word rape and not confuse it, but it is a rape culture, right? Patriarchy enforces the idea that consent doesn't matter. And in a spiritual movement, we understand, regardless of what body you're in, regardless of what you look like, regardless of how much external power you have a right to consent. And you have a right to not consent too. And it's only in understanding those things are we going to understand the ways of the forest. Are we going to understand the ways of the different species? The ocean. Did you know that at the last count, the ocean is 87% dying? 87%. The ocean does not consent to this. But we force this on the ocean. That's a rape culture. So do you see what I mean when I'm talking about spirituality? So one thing that you can do, and everyone can do this, remind yourself every day that you are connected to this earth. Whether it's sitting on the earth for just 5 minutes, whether it's going for a walk and feeling the breeze, whether it's planting something. You know, one of the things that I did, and I did it for years, was I slept as close to the earth as possible. I slept on the floor because it was close to Mother Earth, so I didn't forget her. Right? Do something every day to remember her. And if you do that, you're going to wake up and you're going to be motivated every single day to do something. Any last questions? Because I know that we've gone way over time and we should wrap this up. Any last questions? Thank you all so much. Thank you for the space, Sani. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this event here. Thank you to Kathy for organizing this. Thank you to all of you who came, all of the people who had to leave early. Thank you to all of them. Thank you to John for doing the video and tech. Thank you to the ancestors of this land. Thank you to the guardians of this land. Thank you to the indigenous people of this land. Thank you to the people of color of this land who are in the struggle and have been in this struggle for hundreds of years. Thank you all so much.